Hello and welcome to another episode of Hydra's Den. I'm your host Hydra, and today I am going to be going over some topics that I've been asked about recently. If you ever want to add your own questions, suggestions for streams, whatever have you, feel free to join the Discord. I'm on there all the time, and I'll talk with you about whatever. So, today we are going to be talking about some large-scale world building tips and some stuff about traps and other dungeon making stuff a bit later. So, first off, world building. I was actually linked a very nice little blogspot post here, I suppose, to start. It goes over some quick questions for a campaign setting. Some of them are actually pretty useful. Of course, I don't want to just rip this off, so I'm not going to, go through and just only go on that. But of these, let's see if we can get them up on screen here. It would be, nope. There we are. And if I were to put them up, it would look something like this. So, this is a mess of questions here. I could probably link to the blogspot if people want to see it, but it is just for anyone who's looking. It's on something called Jeff's Game Blog. So shout out to Jeff, I guess, whoever that may be, because you have some good questions here. Not all of them I would honestly think are the most important, but these are good places to start once you have your world. Of course, we should probably start a bit earlier than that. And of course, for all Canadians out there, happy Turkey Day, as just finished celebrating Thanksgiving. And yeah, maybe you can listen while you eat. Who knows? But before we go into these questions, of course, the first things would be to ask about, the most important questions of what kind of world am I making? There we go. Sorry about that. What kind of world am I making? So this is, of course, the first step to any sort of campaign. I've talked about this a bit earlier in how to make a campaign, how to make a short one, how to make a one-shot, all sorts of stuff. But and it may seem pretty obvious, but what kind of world you make is going to have a huge effect on what kind of campaign you do. For the obvious reasons, if you do high seas, you want to have a place with lots of water. If you do something going across the plains, you would want us to have something with a lot of multi-dimensional shenanigans. But more importantly, what kind of world I'm making, what I'm really thinking about is what kind of world am I making in terms of what is often described as high magic or low magic or gothic. It's like geography is obviously a question, but these questions are a lot more important to you, or to anyone really. So let's really get into this. When we look at it, if you don't know, the idea of high magic or low magic, these are probably the best place to start. This is if you're running any sort of fantasy. So high magic refers to any sort of setting in which, there is a high amount of magic. Magic is a common and abundant occurrence. This would be Harry Potter type settings. This would be really classic fantasy where you have wizards running around everywhere doing all sorts of crazy stuff. A high magic setting is often going to be a lot more intense. You have, because of course you have magic weapons around everywhere. You could have magical beasts everywhere. It definitely contributes to a more of a power fantasy type game because of the fact that, players can throw around fireballs all day. It definitely makes it a lot more, it gives you a lot more options, I find, in terms of making all sorts of different scenarios occur, because with magic really anything's possible. But it is to say that you can't do the same thing with a low magic or non-magic setting. It's just to say that it's a bit easier because you can hand wave away some of the nitty-gritty by just saying, magic. In high magic settings, typically this is going to be for the players that are going to want to just, have fun, kick ass, feel powerful. If you run a high magic setting where you're also putting a lot of pressure on the players, it's usually a lot tougher than other settings, just because a high magic setting that's tough on the players usually is a setting where the players and the enemies are equally matched in terms of what they can do. It's just there's a lot more enemies gunning for the players. And that tends to make things really disastrously difficult. I mean, if you just look at any of the classic really difficult D&D scenarios, the one that comes to mind is Tomb of Horror. Some of the like traps and stuff in that require a really like bizarre thought process to try and think your way through. Some of them will require you to do all sorts of bizarre things, or they'll have all sorts of bizarre effects. Anything, I can't actually speak to specifically Tomb of Horror's traps because I don't have it in front of me, but an example would be you could have a setting where gravity becomes inverted, and you can play around with that. You could have settings where the floor is now made of lava. It just flickers on and off. Or if you touch the one I remember once doing was one where you had a mirror world. You had two mirror worlds, one of light and one of dark. If you walked into the light, you got thrown into one world. If you walked into the dark, you got thrown into the other. So people were playing going back and forth between them against a pair of enemies that also were jumping in between them. So it's an interesting sort of setting, sort of design scenarios that you could add when you have that high magic. But just keep in mind that it's a really going to be trying to think of the best way to describe this. The biggest issue I think with high magic is that it's often very exploitable, because once again magic allows you to hand wave around away a lot of restrictions. It also gives the players a lot of flexibility to do bizarre things. Things like, let's just say, I don't know, flood entire cities by opening up portals into a dimension full of water, or make a pistol that shoots cannonballs by shrinking down the cannonballs and having them fire and putting a ring that cancels magic around the end of your pistol. Things like that. It's ridiculous things. There's plenty of green text about them on 4chan and all sorts of other places where that type of stuff is archived. That'll explain exactly what sort of stupidity can happen in a high magic setting. High magic, as I said, it gets a little silly, but there's still a lot of fun to be had. Everyone loves those classical settings because it's a lot more valiant, it's a lot more epic than usual, because it's divested from real life. It's like video games, it's like classic fantasy books, whatever, what have you. So let's move on from there though. Now we're to talk about low magic. So low magic, in the same way that high magic is a setting where, swords and sorcery are everywhere, low magic is going to be something more like Game of Thrones. It's going to be something more like nothing else really comes to mind. I'm sorry, I'm recovering from devouring some turkey, and it was delicious, but it has slowed me down a wee bit. Low magic is going to be a setting. Game of Thrones is the best example that comes to mind, because it's a perfect example. You have most people running around who do not have magic. Magic would be a foreign, a very unique and bizarre thing. Very often in low magic settings, magic will either be very difficult to obtain or simply not viable. There's often a sort of balance, like when I do my GOPD sessions, which you can also see on the channel. There's a few of them at this point. Low magic, they are an example effectively of a low magic setting, though they may not feel like it at first because you have people running around with demons and stuff everywhere. What I mean though when I say low magic in this case is that it is a setting where magic is not something that is primarily used. It is not the primary mechanism around which everything happens. A low magic setting is typically characterized by a greater focus on the struggle of a person through all sorts of encounters, a lot of which are going to be very, very grounded in reality. If you have let's just say, and for my GOPD is again an example, plugging my stuff a little, a shootout. If you have a shootout between two groups and they're firing at each other, that is something where if it's a low magic setting, there's not a whole lot you can do other than contend with the fact that you are now in a gunfight. On the other hand, if you have a high magic setting, you could throw up force fields that deflect the bullets, or telekinesis, or mind control, or throw a fireball, incinerate them. There's all sorts of options that are no longer available to you, and thus you have to contend with things as they are. You have to go out there, grit your teeth, get your gun, and go bang, bang, bang. This isn't to say that in a low magic setting You can't have people who are stronger or greater than regular men. Another good example would be Lord of the Rings, where most people don't use magic. Like, magic exists, yes. I'm probably going to get a few arguments. Nope, this is actually Lord of the Rings was a high magic, whatever. This is by my definition. My definition really is that a low magic setting will be a setting where magic is not a main mechanism by which things occur or by which things are solved. Low magic means that you have to deal with things yourself. You have to deal with things in a more realistic, grounded way. However, magic can still exist. Perhaps you have to deal with magic by more grounded, realistic means. If a dragon appears and you don't have a magical spell which can stop it from burning down the village, you may have to resort to traditional bow and arrow, or wait for it to land and go after it with a sword. Whatever occurs, whatever you may need. Low magic is traditionally, a lot of people do like it. It's not personally my cup of tea. So, and it's going to be for people who want that very grounded. That's weird of me to say, because grounded, it doesn't always have to be grounded. Once again, you can have Middle Ages, you can have whatever. But I guess what I'm trying to say is things such as, like the biggest one that actually comes to mind is that injuries will be a lot more permanent. Any setting with healing magic is going to really invalidate a lot of injuries and threat of injuries that people have. And if you take that away, suddenly every encounter has a heck of a lot more risk, since a rogue shot or stab can end someone's life, much like the real world. And of course, then we have the no magic settings, which will usually be more focused on, real world stuff, or on some sort of fantasy type stuff without any sort of hand waving of magic. Not saying that magic is a bad thing, and in fact I love it a lot, but many people who prefer low magic or no magic settings will argue that a magical setting just allows you to hand wave away problems instead of trying to solve them in a more reasonable or logical fashion. And that's okay too. So once you get that out of the way for your world making, this really, I just realized this stream is really going to build off of the previous one I made about where I had a Collins and we talked about specifically just world building in a nutshell and all the stuff. Oh, whoops! I just looked over my chat. Someone's talking about. Yeah, I probably should have music playing. Honestly, I've thought about this before, Wolf, but I'm not 100% sure about my copyrights. And honestly, I would be a little frightened to put something up there and then have it, pulled down, because the music's there and frankly not know how to extract the music or, mute the music in the background for it. So, I mean, if I could ever find a nice, really big selection of music that I really appreciated and worked in such a way, then, we could have something. But otherwise, I'm not so sure about it. So back on our topic though, so once you get your magic out of the way, our next real question is going to be, what sort of adventure do I want to bring the players through? That's going to, not just what sort of adventure do I want to bring the players through in terms of high seas, on land, whatever, we've been through that already enough times, but what sort of adventure do I want to bring the players through in terms of, do I want an adventure where that's about politics? Do I want an adventure that's about war? Do I want an adventure where the enemy is going to be something concretely, that's a terrible term for it, something that's definitively not human? And when I say human, I mean whatever your generic innocent races are, because your innocent races can be elves, hobbits, dwarves, whatever they may be. They are basically humans, but with a new fresh coat of paint on them. If you have that sort of setting where you're an evil, can be, orcs, enemy roving army of the undead, or aliens from the nth dimension. Typically, when you're writing the setting, you're going to have to take that into account. In other words, what you're going to be thinking about is not how do I make everything as grounded as real as possible. Rather, you're going to be thinking about how would everybody in the world contend with the problem that's going to be created here. So, in the setting of a fantasy setting where the enemy is an evil army of orcs headed by some evil overlord, you're going to want a setting in which people on average do not fight each other. It's going to be a much more peaceful setting, probably. I mean, you can mix it together, and nothing wrong with that, but it's going to be people are much less at each other's throats when there's a looming army of orcs on the horizon. So it's going to be, when you're focusing on how you write things, you're going to be thinking about, how do these people get along? How do these people trade with each other? How do these people survive in the face of this terrible threat? Whereas if the threat is perhaps more the world itself, and by that I mean you can have a big bad, but they might actually sort of fade into the background sometimes as the players contend with all sorts of adventures from here to there and everywhere in between. Then you might want to write a bit more in terms of, do these two cities get along with each other? Is there a conflict between one side and the other? So if I were to make that a note of that, it would be for what kind of world am I making? The next would be, what kind of people live there? People live there. So what kind of people live there is going to once again be a big determining factor on how you write. It's going to be a big determining factor on how you play the characters, because as the DM, you have to play everybody who's not a player. So if you're playing a setting where the NPCs are, well, exactly that, they're supposed to fade into the background and let the players focus on, let's just say, this evil army, then you don't need to put a ton of time into each individual character. Perhaps when the players enter a town, they have the innkeep, and he does his innkeep thing. And as I said in the previous stream, it might be good to add a few little themes to each character, a few little pointers that can happen in a town. But the focus will be less on them and more on how the town itself exists and how the town contends with its problems. If that doesn't really make sense, what I'm trying to say is that in a town like that, you're not going to have as much problems of, let's just say, a serial murderer. You wouldn't have a serial murderer or a werewolf a werewolf picking off villagers in a setting where you want the players focused on the big enemy. It's distracting, it's fluff, and I mean, unless you really want to put the players off of whatever they're doing for a bit, it's probably just not for the best. I've actually made this mistake before where I was trying to keep the players focused on a major enemy, but I would put too much fluff in between them and the enemy, and they'd forget about what their actual enemy was. It's that sort of, it reminds me of people talk about Skyrim. They'll do all these side quests, and they forget about the main plot of the big dragon trying to kill the world. Because, why do you even think about him? Because you're too busy doing this and that and all these side quests. It's basically, all these things will be distractions. So, on the other hand, if you're trying to build a world and everything within the world is something that the players will be interacting with, it's about the adventure along the way, then typically, since you're not really going to have a very complex villain, you may have a looming villain in the distance, or an objective to, I don't know, deliver the ring to the volcano, or whatever you want. I'm just making reference to Lord of the Rings because it's easy. But whatever your quest is, if your quest itself is simple, then the world can be more complex. So that's actually perfect. Normally I'd have someone else here to kind of bounce ideas off of. They would help me keep myself bouncing back and forth, but none of my co-hosts are on, and well, everybody's off at turkey dinner from the sounds of it. If anyone at some point wants to come on, I can put a little Discord link right here in the comments. Feel free to jump in at any point if you want. Feel free to just talk about anything. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them as well, but till then I'm just going to be here spinning my wheels. So, the point that I was going to say is that that's actually Damn it, forgot what I was going to say. Um, oh, that's quite annoying, actually, when you are just about to make a great point and then you completely forget it. My point was going to be... Yeah, I'll come back to me. Whatever my point was going to be, I'm sure it was important. Here it is. My point is here is that if you have a setting where the villain is complex, you want the NPCs to be simple and the world around the players to be simple. And vice versa, if the big bad is simple, then you want the NPCs and the world around the players to be complex. So you don't want to focus on complexity for for both of them, and you don't want to focus on complexity for only one. If you do complexity on both, then honestly nothing really happens because everybody gets confused and distracted by each little nuanced thing that you write, and they'll lose track of whatever the original thread was. If you do neither, then nothing ever happens because, well, nothing is written out, and everyone feels a little bored with your setting. I mean, unless it can come off like a classical video game type trope, and if your players want to do nothing more than senseless violence and roll dice, then that works. So, once we have those things out of the way, you know what? Let's deal with these questions. Let's deal with these questions because I've had them on screen for long enough. These are supposed to be questions once you have written up your setting, once you have your characters in it. These are questions, I suppose, that are good ones to ask in terms of filling in little bits of details, I guess, in that little week before the session starts. You know, when everything's ready and you're like, oh, it's time to brush up the last bits of my notes and add the little bits of fluff. These are nice questions. So going down this list, there's a few that really stand out for me. So what's the deal with my cleric's religion? This is a great one. If you don't know what the player's religion is and how that works, you're going to have problems down the line, mostly because you won't understand your players. Understanding your players' motivation is absolutely essential to writing well for your characters. If you don't know what your characters are thinking or what they want to do, then when you do write, it's probably, well, first off, as I said, it's going to be misinterpreted. And secondly, it's going to be adjacent almost, or like contradictory to whatever they want to do. If you're, let's just say, or for an example, your player's cleric is a cleric of, I don't know, justice. They are obsessed with justice. They must conduct justice and they must do just things, and they want to be involved in law. If you give them a setting in which the enemy is unequivocally evil, then the player will never really have a chance to shine. And by that I mean, if you put a setting in which all orcs are pure evil monsters that deserve slaying and nothing more, a cleric of justice will never really have a chance to shine. It comes down to the fact that they won't have anything that allows them to exert that moral character that they've been building. On the other hand, if you have a character that is just a second, sorry, just sending a message. If you have a cleric who is all about punishing evil and smiting evil, a cleric who's dedicated to the destruction of all things sinful or wretched in the world, giving them a moral dilemma is not only going to be contradictory to their character, but it's honestly a little mean, because you're going to have a person who wants to simply, smite evil. They want to be that Deus Vult champion of good and all things great in the world, but you're giving them morally ambiguous characters. If the orcs may just be misunderstood, then that's not really fair to the player, right? Especially if the players don't know any better and they go in. This is a story I actually hear often where the classic example is the paladin smites the guy, but the DM decided, no, that guy's not evil, so you immediately fall. Unless the paladin is smite happy to begin with and is just going after anything that moves, this typically means that the DM has not properly conveyed what the person is. And that usually means that, and in terms of alignment, that means probably that you're giving the player the wrong kind of issue. If the players want nothing more than to smite evil all the time, don't give them paladin traps. That's just not fair. It's not fun. I mean, unless you're being spiteful. And if you're being spiteful, why are you being spiteful? Why are you being spiteful? It's not fun. Nobody likes it, and frankly, when you pick a fight with your players, nobody wins. So that's a good one right off the bat. So next little one here is where can we go to buy standard equipment? This is a classic one. Just set up a store. You don't have to have a complex store. It can be whatever. Sometimes a little bit of flavor can go a long way, depending on whether you want to flavor the shopkeeper, the grizzled old veteran of war who now sells arms, or a happy-go-lucky first-time merchant who orders everything in bulk and seems to bungle up your orders half the time. It's nice little flair that can be nice, but that's a pretty basic question. Where can we get the plate mate? Where can we go to get plate mail custom fitted for this monster I just befriended? Solid question. Usual answer should be a blacksmith or other arms merchant. I don't feel like this is a question that really needs to be asked unless you know that your players are going to try something like that, and usually you'll get a feeling about whether or not they're going to do that by maybe your first few sessions. It's a solid question. You can always hand wave away with you find a blacksmith who's willing to do it. But if you want to add a little bit more complexity, this might actually be a problem. If the players want to have plate mail custom fitted for some monster that they befriended, then maybe they have to go on a little bit of an adventure to find that. Maybe they have to go to a specific place who makes monster armor. Perhaps not everyone does it. You could go all sorts of places with that. It's a nice little, I guess, open-ended question in that it can start a lot of stuff, but not unless you want to specifically start something around that. It's easily hand-waved away. So, who is the mightiest wizard in the land? Good for world building, definitely. Is this going to be important for session 1? Probably not. Because I try to focus here on session 1. I try to focus, at least on the first maybe 10 to 15 sessions. The mightiest wizard in the land, if it's not your villain, it's probably going to be someone either third party or directly related to your villain. If the mightiest wizard in the land isn't in your quest and it's a high magic setting, it feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity. Perhaps. Who knows? Up to you again. Not a bad question again, but that's going to be my opinion on quite a few of these questions. They're not bad, but they're not the strongest thing around. So, who is the greatest warrior in the land? Well, by the end of this, it's probably going to be the players. But before that, once again, might be your big bad, might be someone around them. And the reason why I'd usually give this title to the big bad is because you want the big bad to be someone really intimidating. You want them to be someone worth, giving a two craps about. So if the greatest warrior in the land isn't the big bad, then the question becomes, why isn't the greatest warrior in the land dealt with the big bad? And that's a hard one to answer. So those two, who is the greatest wizard and who is the greatest warrior, they're a bit loaded. And I also, frankly, I prefer to think of it as perhaps you have two wizards that are both good, but they are good at different types of things. When you start going straight into someone being objectively the best, you get a setting where someone can, if the players then become better, now the player is the best. Whereas if you have a setting that's a bit more variable, where perhaps someone's the best evocationist, someone's the best at throwing fireballs, someone's the best at, someone's the best at illusion, someone's the best at healing. Where you have a setting like that, it becomes a lot better because you have a variable thing where perhaps the player beats the best, illusionist in the land. Maybe that means they're a pretty good illusionist, maybe, or maybe it just means that they're good at beating down illusionists. It adds a bit more variability to it, and it doesn't end the conversation. That's actually a good point right there. I'm going to go with that one. It doesn't end, like saying someone is definitively the best tends to end the conversation. Once you say, yes, this guy is the best there is at what you've done, you have wasted every other wizard, because who cares about every other wizard when they're not the best wizard? And not only that, but once you have a best wizard, why hasn't the best wizard simply solved every problem? It's a trap that a lot of people like to get into when they will look at someone and they'll objectively say, this thing is the best. I think part of it comes from the fact that the settings, especially Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, Hutso, hello Hutso. Your mic is muted, by the way.
It is. Howdy doody.
Howdy doody. So I am just going over a few questions that I was given recently, and the main ones, it come from this little list, and the one that I'm talking about right now is the idea of someone being the strongest. And the question was specifically, who is the greatest wizard in the land for your setting?
Right. I heard you being very eloquent and that, and I almost completely agree. Like, if the mightiest wizard is either not the big bad evil guy, a or someone in the party, then either you don't mention him or he is gonna be someone that helps the party out.
Yeah,
Like, if if you're bringing someone up, there's no point in bringing someone up unless you're either enriching the backstory or directly advancing the story arc.
yeah.
Because other,
You're completely right.
yeah, because other than that, it's just like reading a history book, like just more names. Names go with dates, and then they don't do anything. So unless a character is going to do a thing in your plot, or you have the availability for your players to interact with them in some way, then there's no point in answering.
Yeah,
If your wizard acolyte player character asks, who would my character look up to, and you don't have one in mind, fuck it, let them make that up, and then that can be kind of their go with their backstory, and they can tell you about it, and that saves you the hassle of, yes, it's Archibald the Great, he lived from this date to this date, and he's currently this or this or this in this foreign land.
yeah.
like like
You clearly been through this a bit. If you have, do you have some experience, I assume, with fantasy type stuff? Just a background, me and Hutso, we've done a few games together. He was actually on our last episode of GOPD, and yeah, we talked with each other. Do you actually have any experience with DMing or world building?
I've dabbled. I've only ever DM'd one campaign, and it kind of fell through after a few sessions just because of scheduling conflicts.
Of course.
But it, I did the footwork, and
Yeah.
I've played in several campaigns, watched other people play, so I'm roughly familiar with it. But again, take everything I say with a grain of salt because I might be pulling it out my rear end.
Yeah, and I've actually stopped bringing this up at the beginning of each stream, but take anything that we all say with a grain of salt. Everyone's going to have their own variations on things. There are very few things that I believe are defined always the case. One of them is going to be the next question on that list, which is who is the richest person in the land. And while this is a fine question, I guess, to ask, it's typically going to be your king or your major lord. It's
And that's something you'll hear a lot from the rogue who likes money. Is
Yes, it is.
who can I rob? Well, it's
Yeah,
going to be the hardest person to rob.
yeah.
Either a king or a dragon or even a god. And generally, robbing a god is not a very smart move. But hey, you do you.
Well, yeah. Not only that, so this is a great, as you said, this is going to be a great pointer for setting up little rogue side stories. This is also going to be the bane of your existence because once the rogue has robbed the richest person in the land, they will now ask who is the next richest person in the land, and it will continue onwards into infinity because rogues, by their nature, will try and steal everything. This is going to be something that you're going to need to balance against the rest of the campaign. The easiest and most railroady, I suppose, that people would accuse you of railroading for doing this. The best way to set it up, though, would be to simply say the richest person in the land is the big evil, and then you have immediately put a sticker on them that says "Please steal from me," and set the rogue on their merry way. So, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime you can throw something in the story that kind of answers it, preempts a lot of these questions, is you are in this land, in this situation, doing this thing, and this land is owned by blah blah blah, who is in fiefdom of the king. it's automatically implied that the king has the most money than his lords.
Yeah,
Feudal system, generally people can understand that king has money, lords have some money but less, and then you get the mayors and the burghers and the merchants, and then the ye old peasants who life saving is 3 coins in a brown bag under the bed.
of course. So the next few, honestly, I'm going to blow through from this list, which are going to be because most of these I feel like while they are somewhat important, they are going to typically either be answered by look to your own party for this, or it's going to be a specific, little sort of. If it's the type of thing where you'd add a little asterisk at the end of it and say, well, depends on this and depends on that. And these are going to be things
Mm-hmm.
like, where can I go to get some magical healing? I don't know. Ask your cleric. Um, where can I go to get the cures for the following conditions? Poison, disease, cure, level drain, curse, level drain, lycanthropy, polymorph, alignment change, death, and undeath. That's going to depend on whether or not you use any of them. If you set up a condition in your game like lycanthropy, either make sure that you have a way to cure lycanthropy, or make sure that you have a way or make sure the players understand that this is not something they will be curing. These are dark times if they get it. So,
Right. A good number of these things also for all of these questions I'm seeing is, it's going to be dependent completely on like the town you're in. If you're in
of
the main
course,
capital, then there might be a wizard's college that can deal with all this stuff. But if you're in podunk, middle of nowhere farming town, magical healing, there might be a dude who can sell you some potions that'll do some healing. But as far as cures to bigger stuff, that's going to be all at the party. So
yeah,
if you're starting your party out in the middle of nowhere, don't start them out with going up against a vampire unless you've got it pre-scripted to pull out, or leave them with the early defeat sort
yeah.
of intro.
I should actually back this up a little. So these questions all come from a little link I was given that basically goes through like top 20 questions in order that your DM should be thinking about in order to sort of set up stuff that you won't have to be asked on the spot. And I guess the idea is that these are things that are going to add some more flavor to your setting. And like the specific ones that I'm skimming over are going to be the ones that I feel aren't like because as I said, I was given these to think about. Some of these I feel aren't going to be all of that important for you, at least not until you're maybe 10 to 15 sessions in.
Hmm.
And by that point, it's not a bad idea to think about them. But by that point, you're probably, you probably can quickly answer that. And so that's why I'm going to throw past things like magical healing, unless they you don't have a cleric or some other natural magical healing. So the next ones are going to be: is there a magical guild my MU belongs to? And I assume that's magic user belongs to, or that I can join in order to get more spells. This basically falls under the same sort of heading as any sort of thing about this. This is in the same way that the rogue will ask, "Where's the richest person?" The wizard will ask, "Where do I get my magic? Where do I get more magic?" You'll always be asking about more magic, and unless you giving them a setting that specific where you want them spending all their gold on this, don't give them a store at the beginning of the game where they can spend all their money on more magic, or they will spend all their money on more magic. It's going to go disastrously, and they will be and everyone will be very unhappy when the wizard is horribly under equipped.
Yeah, in the same way that this can generate that rich people can generate rogue kind of side quests, you can do the same thing with a warlock. Hey, go to this magic school and help them, I don't know, clear rats from the dungeon, and they
Precisely.
might teach you a thing, and that can always evolve into other side missions that the group helps out with. But it learning new skills or acquiring the character's stereotypical wants. Um, gold for the rogue, glory for the fighter, knowledge for the wizard. That's
And
that's
religion for the priest. Yes.
absolutely yeah, that's absolutely story material. That's what you can do all of your side quests off of. That's what
Of
a lot
course.
of modern video games do. That companion quests.
Yeah. So the next, and this falls into the next three as well. A lot of these are starting to fall into this, which is where can I find alchemist, sage, or other expert NPC? Unless you specifically need these, I actually do not believe that this is a good question. This isn't something that you immediately need to pose, because I feel like this is the type of thing you ask your DM. The DM writes up a shit ton of side characters to like when the DM sees it, they'll write up an alchemist, they'll write up a sage, they'll write up a wizard university and all this other crap, and then it never gets used. So just remember that while you might have this stuff, while you might have need of this stuff on hand, if your players perhaps are going to be dealing with something that requires alchemy, like your players might need an alchemist if they're doing something regarding alchemy. Otherwise, you probably don't need it. If you can spend a little bit of time, but DMs, please do not get caught writing a gorillion NPCs for every situation. I've done this before. It's not worth it.
If anything, my 2 cents would be, you know, have, a list of names and a rough idea of, this is a small town. You're gonna find Bo the farmhand and that sort of stuff. And if bigger stuff comes up, stick a name with 3 towns over there's an alchemy shop with Hylia the wizard in it,
Yeah. Or
and
yeah, sorry, I was gonna say, or you could do that, or you can just have the names on hand. If you like, if let's just say the characters refuse to touch the potion that you have told them is a healing potion because they just don't trust that it's a healing potion, and they insist no, they have to go to an alchemist to see it. Just bloody give them an alchemist. Like, you just have a name on hand. Okay, it's now it's Jimbo the alchemist. He's in town. He's right over there. Go, because unless you want the players running 3 towns over to go get that alchemy appraised, which can be a nice little side quest, but if they're just gonna do this every goddamn time and just waste your time with this, just give them it. Just give the baby his bottle. Give them an alchemist. Just pull one out of your ass and just get on with your day. Because otherwise, it is the type of thing that will very quickly become a massive pain in the ass. If there's anything you wanted to add, Hutso. Sorry, I kind of cut you off.
no, you're good. Yeah, it's a, my style of DMing is very low prep, and it's a lot of, come up with things on the spot, write it down so it's consistent in the story, and move on. Like, the biggest thing you can do to kill your group of players as players and not as player characters is to take it 10 years to describe, every single house in the town, what every piece of thatched roof is doing. Like, answer the questions, absolutely, give them some detail, but, keep the plot moving. The plot is what's going to keep bringing them back.
Yeah, you are completely right. I feel like at some point all DM, like, this is something in my experience that I've seen with most DMs. At some point, all DMs are going to encounter this sort of wall, which is the wall where the DM says, "Fuck it, I'm just going to kind of write down this, and I'm done because I don't want to spend 3 more days writing every single piece of backstory for every single character in this bloody town." So every DM will get to this point where they are confronted with a question of how do you deal with the fact that you don't want to spend days upon days writing for every single bloody session, and each DM's going to have their own answer. My answer is write some fluff about the town, write little pieces of fluff for different like encounters and things in case you need to distract them with something shiny, and do the rest of it on the spot. And I feel like a lot of people are going to do that. This kind of leaks into the next question, which is where can I hire mercenaries? Some DMs love using hirelings and the like, NPCs who will carry your gear, NPCs who can do this, that, or the other, NPCs that will fight for you. If you have gold, of course, you can do this, that, and the other. I hate mercenaries so much. Words fail me about how much I despise this. Not just because I have to speak as another character, but that's like a permanent fixture in the party, but also because I'd honestly preferred if the players did the work themselves, and it's the player's adventure, not yours. So if that's something that appeals to your party, if they want the hirelings, write them, but this is not something I believe for first session. This is something that you will pick up very quickly that they want, and then you will take some time to do it. Or if they catch you that first session, then you homebrew something. Honestly, not a question that I believe a DM needs to spend a lot of time with. This next one I do like, though. Is there any place on the map where swords are illegal, magic is outlawed, or any other notable hassles from Johnny Law? Good question. Not a question that immediately comes to mind. This is because this is a question I feel that is more going to be something related to your plot. If like it's the type of thing that you'll probably decide beforehand for a town. If you go to a town and you want the town to be definitively anti-magic, you decide that beforehand, and it's the type of thing that will add to the setting. It's a nice little feature if perhaps the players have to, check like take off their swords and leave them at the in a tent when they go to talk with the tribal chief, or the wizard has to like perhaps one race is forced to stay. What the fuck? Sorry, I heard something weird in my house. I don't know what that was, but if I disappear, you know what happened. It was probably spooks. So, if
That is that time of year.
it is that time of year. So, if you perhaps have some casual racism, perhaps dwarfs aren't allowed in the elven city, the dwarf has to sit outside. I usually wouldn't go quite that far just because it's a little mean to the dwarven player because they get to sit around and do absolutely nothing.
Right. But if you have a dwarven NPC that travels with the party, that would be a good time to implement that to shed that extra weight as a DM, because rolling a long-term NPC that sticks with the party can be fun, or a DMPC, but at the same time, it's nice to shed that weight and get back to watching your players do their thing, because that's one of the best parts.
Yeah. So sometimes you need a place to park your NPCs. Sometimes you need a place to park your players. I mean, there is also amusing times that you can have where perhaps one player isn't allowed in and the player gets to have their own little interactions, but it does tend to wear on them. If you do it, I'd say don't do it more than once. You could do it once as a little, oh ho ho, this is amusing, like perhaps no men are allowed in the Amazon village, so the only female character has to go in and talk. But don't do it. Don't have every sixth village be the Amazon village. Your male players will just get pissed off.
Yeah, generally separating your characters, singling out a one to do anything gets real repetitive real quick. So if you do have reason to separate your group, and you have one elf, one dwarf, one human, and one gnome, separate out the short-lived people, the gnome and the human or something. Keep them in pairs, keep them in groups, because then there's that natural interaction between the players can be a thing, and it's not just one-on-one DM and player.
Yeah, and a more fun thing to even add to that is sometimes mix it up. One of my favorite things in my session has been taking weird since I have a dedicated berserker and dedicated thief and a dedicated wizard and a dedicated cleric, sometimes mixing things up, since the cleric and the wizard tend to be the ones who are very brainy, maybe, and the other two are kind of the impulsive dumbasses. No offense to my berserker and thief if they're listening. You guys know exactly why I'm saying that. You know what you've done. But sometimes it might be amusing to match people up in weird ways. Like I've had times where the devout cleric gets matched up and has to go out with the berserker, and you get very interesting ones, especially if the berserker's been dabbling in weird occult demon stuff, and suddenly you have a very interesting sort of interaction between two people who normally don't do a lot of interacting, and it creates interesting scenes. Or perhaps you put the two dumbasses together and you see what happens. In some cases, this will be probably the most destructive and your greatest regret. When you put two dumbasses together, cities burn. Which way to the nearest tavern? Next question. Classic one. If you haven't answered this one already, you're not in D&D. The tavern is, of course, the most notable of the fixtures in any town, city, village, whatever. Spend a good minute or two thinking about your tavern, because if you have adventurers, they will flock there. What monsters are terrorizing the countryside sufficiently that if I kill them, I'll become famous? This is the beginning of the questions I don't like, because these questions are plot hooks. And why did I not like that? It's because these questions are ones that was linked as, these questions are ones that you should think about before your players ask and put you on the spot. Well, if you haven't thought about the monster terrorizing the countryside sufficiently, which is a great plot hook, if you haven't thought about this obvious quest plot hook and it's somehow putting you flat-footed, then I don't know what to tell you, man. You haven't really been writing a story now, have you? You know, um, it's
I
like
don't know. When I see this section of questions, it says more to me like, all right, your players are level 12, say, and they've defeated the first main thing you're writing the story about, and maybe you're hitting a bit of writer's block or something. You don't know how to continue after. Hey, you killed this guy who was trying to become a lich. The folks in the area like you. Where can we go from here? And these are good questions to continue the story, even, or to start the story if you're lacking some inspiration.
oh
But as far as like on the spot questions, yeah, generally you try and get the players involved with the plot enough that they won't ask any of these.
well, yeah. I mean, it's not only just that though, but what my argument is that these questions are the plot. Like
Yes.
the monsters are the plot. If you don't know what your plot is, you are only now being asked what your plot is, and you are caught flat-footed not knowing what your plot is, I don't know what to tell you. You haven't clearly. Maybe you should go back and watch a few more of my videos. We talk about this type of stuff in a bit more detail. Not being a complete plug, but I'm terrible nonetheless. Like this, there's going to be a few of these. So that one out of the way. Are there any wars brewing I could go fight? Once again, are there? Tell me, Mr. DM, have you written this? In some way, these are going to be essential to world building, and since we're talking about world building, these are things that, these are actually good questions in that way. But I'm specifically harping on them only because I was given these as once you already have your campaign basically ready. These are like 11th hour questions. If the question of whether or not there are any wars brewing is an 11th hour question, then perhaps you should go back and think about that and think about the fact that perhaps you haven't, filled up your plot enough.
Yeah, these are generally main things. Like these will influence your campaign even if your character's not involved in them.
Yeah.
Like if you're out, you have to kill. I always go back. You have to kill this guy becoming a lich, but there's also a war going on, and the countryside's being terrorized by werewolves. Like they will come into play at some point.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
these are essential story building pieces that should definitely be considered.
Yeah, that they should. Well, my opinion is that they should already have been considered. The one that I
Yes.
do like though is how about any gladiatorial arenas to compete with for hard-earned glory or fabulous cash prizes. This one I'll allow because unlike the others, this one is not like okay. So the others one could be are basically side quests. That's what they are. They are not the main quest. Perhaps they are the main quest, but they'll usually either be lead-ins for the main quest or side quests that the players will be doing in between main quests. Something like a gladiator arena, a fighting den, or a dungeon that is an old set of ruins that perhaps hold a collection of bandits. These are like side quests. These are what I would say are side quests that your players make for themselves, which is to say they are things that the players decide that they want to do. Much as we were saying earlier about the wizard, a wizard guild, perhaps you have to do a few quests for them. In the same way, a gladiator arena is effectively a quest in and of itself. It is the quest of violence for monetary reward, and
Or a town tournament or something.
exactly. So these things, this one, I'll say is good. It's a good question. It's a good question if you know your players are fighty as all hell. Make sure that you think beforehand about things and give them some punching bags. That being said, if you know your players are fighty and you haven't given them something to hit, and it is only in the 11th hour that you are thinking about this as you are being asked, hey, where can we fight? When can we fight something? Then if I could deliver a rolled up newspaper below to your head, I would, because you screwed up, man.
Yeah,
Sorry.
if your players can't find something to fight, then that's going to be on the DM to
Yeah.
either up the random encounters or up what's going on in the plot. If your plot is your characters are merchants and they need to sell money, then you know a shoot, a gladiatorial arena would still be in the picture, and that's where your characters would fight or something.
Yeah.
But it's all about like I keep going back to, think about what your story's trying to accomplish. Think about what's going on in the world when you first draw out that map, And all these last couple of questions are definitely things to consider off the bat and not in the middle of the campaign.
Precisely. The next one is going to go back into my disappointments. Are there any secret societies with sinister agendas I could join and or fight? Well, a sinister agenda is probably the type of thing that goes right under the heading of quest or side quest. So once again, we are going to take that one and throw it right in the trash, so to speak, because if you are having an 11th hour player ask, are there any Illuminatis nearby?
Right. Where is the nearest secret cult, please, and how do I get in?
Either the only two answers to that are, well, look over at your notes and note that they are about to encounter the said secret order. Well, you just notice a mysterious figure sneak up behind you, and then, that ride starts. Or they're going to be, what? It's going to be that sort of shaking your head, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Type scenario, because it's out of left field, for a player to ask that. What is there to eat around here?
Oh boy, I love this one.
I love this one so much because this is one of the best ways, in my opinion, to add great flavor to a setting. So, and this one is going to be a little bit. This is nice in so many ways because right off the bat, you look at the geography to think about this. This is, look at the geography, think about what's around you, and then think of all sorts of local dishes you can do. You can take things from every culture, and you can add so much to a place because we talked last session about the idea if you're next to water, you have a fishing village. If you have a fishing village, then everybody's not eating beef. Everybody's eating fish.
Mm-hmm.
So
for our last GOPD session, we were in the southern U.S. and we stopped at a diner that had, traditional southern cuisine, biscuits and gravy, that sort of thing. And that, like, even little stuff like that. Like, I like food, you like food. Everyone likes food, or at least everyone has to eat. So they're familiar with, like I was just saying, biscuits and gravy. They know what it smells like. They know what it tastes like. They know how you feel eating it. It's a heavy dish, but it's, fairly inexpensive. The culture that comes with it. If I said I was, having a sushi,
yeah,
fish rolled up in rice with a seaweed wrap around it, you'd instantly start to get a sort of Asian vibe.
Yeah.
And you can so easily carry over real life cultures into the game with food choices.
Yeah. What I was actually going to say, and this is a little behind the scenes thing for the GOPD, is like, just to put emphasis on how important food is. That sort of scene there at the beginning with the waitress diner was the first scene that I came up with and was the inspiration for that entire mission. Was a scene where you have a bunch of grizzled agents and they go into the diner, and I had this character of this just nasty maid who's just old and just
Was her name Doris?
Yeah, well, the players gave her that name. She didn't have a name until then, and she just that kind of smoking and just doesn't want to be there, and has been here for 30 years and clearly is not rocking that outfit anymore. That was the first thing that I had and that speaks to it. Food is such an important thing. It is one of our most important cultural, it is the flesh blood of our culture in some ways, because it is the thing where, a meal is the point where everyone comes together, It is no matter if daddy's a lumberjack and mommy works at the loom at a weaving place spinning shirts or scarves or whatever, it doesn't matter. They both come home for dinner. And that is why...
Well, you hope.
Well, you hope, yeah. But they find some time. And it's usually going to be that meal is going to be so important because of that. It is the point where the family sort of rejoins as a unit. Especially breakfast, especially dinner. Dinner is so important in that way. So it is a brilliant thing to think a little bit about. Do a little bit of research. If you want to be a great DM, do a little bit of cooking yourself. Just a little bit, because you will, if you've never cooked. I had not cooked for a while because I'm terrible and never really picked it up myself because my parents always cooked. Went off to university, and the first thing I did was, you know what? I want to learn how to cook. Picked up Joy of Cooking, and the first thing I decided to cook was a freaking chicken parmigiana. and it was confusing, and my first attempt was terrible. But you know what? I had a great time, and now I can, to this day, I that is my signature dish. I cook a mean chicken parmigiana, and
And
yeah,
s- so we had discussed earlier how, maybe swords or magic or a race is not permitted in an establishment. So the food is another fun way to do this,
yeah,
just as a little bit of flavor is, say you have an elf in your party who, doesn't eat meat, doesn't get human food, that sort of thing, or you have a tiefling who really wants some noodles, and the land you're in is very, Western European. What's a noodle? We don't have
yep,
those weird things. But like having the elf who refuses to eat meat go into a cattle town where all they serve
oh
is
yeah,
steaks and bacon and chicken and all that
yeah,
stuff. It's just a great way to subtly poke at the character,
yeah.
and
It's
it
perfect, and it develops them. And like, I mean, my example would be when the players who are normal people follow the barbarian into his barbarian tribe where they're cannibalistic, and they like,
yeah.
and but they're like all lizardmen and savages. So the other thing that they do is they eat people, they eat humans, and they're not going to eat those guys, but they're serving human. And that sort of encounter, what happens when the cleric is offered human as a meal? It's a great question. There's so much, like, this is why I'm saying that the food thing is so fantastic. Anything like it, as I said, it is such a key part of our life that if you don't spend some time on this, you can get away with just giving the generic answer of, there's potatoes and there's bread and there's
Yeah.
stew.
There's a tavern, there's beer, there's stew, you know.
But you're missing out.
Yeah, it's a really really easy and really fun, relatable place to give a whole lot more flavor.
Yeah.
Was it Wizards of the Coast when they did their oh, I can't think of the expansion where they had the jungle. It was all the jungle. Anyway, the
Don't.
people there, it was like the scene from Indiana Jones where they would eat monkey brain, and the first playthrough I saw of it, it just creeped the player characters out so much, and the players themselves too,
Yeah.
and really kind of set the tone for the area of being just really alien.
Yeah. That's like every. I don't think there is a single food story for an RPG that isn't amazing because, like, as I said, I can't gush about this enough. We've been on this for a bit, and I could go on and on and
Oh
on.
yeah, absolutely.
And because it is such a little perfect little thing, But let's keep moving. So, next one, unfortunately straight from a good one back into my ever loving disappointment, which is any legendary lost treasures I could be looking for. Mm,
Sure, there are millions. What are you looking for? No, that's
no.
if it's something legendary and lost and is not part of the game story and your players are asking about it, then something has gone wrong.
Yeah. There's three things off the bat that I see wrong with this, and this comes back to this. I nearly made this mistake once in my life, well, many times actually, where I decided that a merchant would have such a massive variety of magical like stuff that I basically just gave them the magic item compendium, which is something for 3.5 that has it's a compendium of every single magical item from every single book, and I said, this is what he has to offer within this gold range. And that was a terrible mistake because it also has a huge list of legendary artifacts and stuff that should be unique, lost, or rare beyond measure. And that so first off, if it is a lost treasure, your players won't know it exists. If it is like a truly legendary lost one, a truly legendary lost thing is either something that is spoken of in legends from across the ages. It's something that you'll set into the world. It is something you establish well beforehand. You know that the players are going to get this. If it's Excalibur, you are establishing that sword. You are putting it in that stone, and you are saying, this is when this is going to happen, and you are hyping that up all the time, baby.
Yeah,
Talking about
legendary
the
items,
search
lost
for
treasures, they're plot devices.
exactly. And they can be power ups too. They can be whatever, but they are not an 11th hour question. And the last one, I don't quite understand, which is where is the nearest? Nope. Yeah. So Wolf, I actually just checked out the Twitch chat, and Wolf616 says, "Shit, dude, maybe these questions are just to get the brain juices flowing." You're completely right. Normally, these are fantastic questions to get the brain juices flowing, and if you are simply looking for ideas and inspiration for your setting, that's fantastic. But but this specific problem is that these are questions supposedly for a DM who already has their setting and everything right, that has it set up, and they are now being asked them. If the players are asking these things after the session has started, and the DM is put on the spot by this question, then it's a bizarre point of, it's like asking the DM, "Have you statted out those kobolds?" You know?
Yeah, it's very much, if your players are asking these dirt like in the middle of the campaign and you're having to come up on the spot with them, it's uh let me backtrack. This is more your players ask these, how do you come up with something or how do you prepare something that will fit these scenarios? If your players are asking about, where is where's the lost treasure? That's something that should be laid out very early in the story arc by you and not just on a whim. Though I guess some folks, some DMs have the play style of start the players off with one quick mission and don't establish a big bad evil guy. But then again, these are things that should be thought of beforehand.
Yeah. They do speak to the players not being stimulated enough if the players
Yes.
are looking for all these different things. Because if you think about a character, unless they are a glory hound, unless their character is a glory hound constantly seeking thrills, legends, and what have you, they're probably like, then these questions are bizarre, like left field things that seem bizarre in they're just confusing because when does the average person who is stuck in a war against the evil army of evil whatevers have time to pause and say, is there any secret societies I can join nearby? Like, unless it's specifically related to the plot, it's an odd question. So, the last one here is, where's the nearest dragon or other monster with Type H treasure? I have no idea what Type H treasure is.
Oh, just, if you're looking for, I need 10,000 gold worth of diamonds. Where's the
Okay.
nearest monster with diamonds or a certain type?
It's
And
something
that,
that's
again,
amazing
that'll
and
be,
rare.
yeah.
Okay. Um, that's once again going to be something that is going to be heavily dependent on your setting, if it's high magic or low magic. This is going to be dependent on you writing this beforehand. Um, if your character is a dragon slayer, give them dragons. If your player is a ranger whose hated enemy is manticores, give them manticores. But if their player is a random rogue and decides, I am looking for the nearest dragon only because they are greedy and want to drag everyone away from the plot, I don't know. This, it feels on one
Then,
hand like a derail, on the other hand like a nice start of a side quest. What do you think, Hutso?
if your rogue is looking for a dragon and he's not known for being a dragon killer and he just has a couple sneak attacks he's hoping to get off and steal, literal tons of gold, then I would say that would definitely be a situation where the dragon bonks him on his head. His teammates have to bust their rear ends to save him and get him out of there, and then berate him after the fact for it.
Yeah.
Like that seems like a good situation for the player to learn to not be greedy.
Yeah, and it's fine for that. It just puts me off a little only because this question itself has strange sort of implications that you haven't thought about it yourself. Um, it's fine to think about. It's fine to think about and establish big monsters in the weird nearby wilderness, but unless your characters are supposed to search for that vast treasure, don't tell them about it and then be surprised when they decide to go after it. I don't know.
Right. It's very difficult to arrange a monster or an area that says don't come here because this will derail it.
Yeah,
Saying yes, there's a dragon that flies around that mountain, you should stay away is a lot more of an invite to the players than a warning.
yeah. It feels like if you ask it, like that's the type of thing that you set up only if you want to attract someone in to begin with. If you know what I mean. This is why this question just throws me off.
Yeah, it's another one of those that could be more of a hook than just a random question. I want to say the impetus of what they're getting at is say there's one of your PCs has gone down and you need this resource to resurrect them. 10,000 gold worth of diamond or jade or some weird thing that you're not going to find at the store or the blacksmith. Yes, having a place where they can find it would be good, but at the same time, death is death. It's a penalty. So maybe they have to go to the the mine on the other side of the mountains, on the other side of the city, on the other side of the ocean. Make it if they're gonna divert from the main quest to get this specific resource, then that would fully be reasonable to say, all right, guys, hang on, I need to think about this because it was unexpected.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the thing you'll have to do as a DM is say, all right, guys, let's take a bathroom break real quick. I have to figure out where we can get adamantium ore here in this giant ass desert.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. It's something to think about. This is a reason why it is good to look over a bit of your characters, what they're capable of doing, and what they need to do it, and then plan accordingly. Honestly, I was hoping to go through a bit more. I am noticing that our stream is completely dead. There's
Oh.
nobody watching, and honestly, I was kind of expecting this to happen. I was warned beforehand, as it is Turkey Day this weekend in Canada. I don't expect all that many people to be here. I was going to talk about dungeon making and trap making, but we've already gone over an hour here, and this is honestly fine for an episode. I don't think
Oh
anyone
yeah.
else is going to be joining. Um, if there's anything else you want to go over, Hutso here.
Um, just the overall, world building is very important, but don't overstress it. I know some DMs who have, they write out lines of dialogue for the NPCs in this particular village, expecting that the PCs will go there, and the PCs, doing the thing that PCs do is they say, you know, early in the story, before they get hooked with the plot, they say, "Hang on, let's go over here and visit this tournament we heard about," instead of going to do whatever the DM expected. So, never think you can anticipate your players that well. Be ready to brainstorm on the spot and don't get too invested in pre-scripted encounters or interactions.
Yeah, you're completely right. Honestly, this is all like I can go into more detail about world building and detail and all of these specific things that you do and don't want to do. But my main warnings would be that when you set up stuff, make sure that you don't set up things that you aren't planning on then go carrying on through with. Um, we can if anyone wants to come in and they have any other questions, we did end up kind of just spending this stream going over that one little post. It's a good post, started a nice conversation.
Hmm.
But I'll try a bit more next time. If anyone wants me to talk about anything in particular, feel free to join the Discord. There should be a link in our description. Throw me a question. If you ever want to be a part of a game of GOPD, send me a request. I do those, well, really whenever people ask, because I love doing them for new people. And honestly, because it's a bit slow today, let's call it here. We've been here for an hour, and thank you everyone for coming to this episode of Hydra's Den. I'm your host Hydra, and I hope you have a good day.